Hi, welcome to Downway TV. Today we're going to talk about fat people with a thin man. Paul French, the author, one of the co-authors of Fat China, a new book about the obesity epidemic that is descending on the People's Republic of China. Paul, what's going on? Why are Chinese people getting fat?
Well, you have to clarify it. We're talking about urban China. We're not talking about rural China. And we're largely talking about younger people in society. And unlike the West, where the obesity problem has largely tended to be among the lower end of the social scale, here in China's cities, it's very much an emerging middle class problem. So two things are happening. One is as people are getting wealthier, so they're getting fatter. The other is as they're migrating to the cities, they're becoming fatter. So almost to move from the countryside to the city is almost to automatically start to get fatter. To move into a higher income bracket is also to start to get fatter. And we've started to see a rise in obesity rates, particularly among young people and children. And of course that has a knock-on in terms of an explosion in rates of obesity-related illness, such as particularly diabetes.
What are the specific causes of people getting fat in terms of diet, exercise?
Well, as far as we can work out, we really would have loved to have written a book that just blamed McDonald's for everything, right? And that would have probably been quite popular, but unfortunately you can't. Certainly the likes of McDonald's and Kentucky Fried Chicken and the donut shops are part of it. That's something relatively new that's come into the diet. But really the problem is just more of everything. So portion sizes are larger, the frequency with which people are eating is more common, and people are still grazing during the day. But instead of in the past where they may have grazed on seeds or nuts or dried fruit or something like that, they're grazing on potato chips and Snickers bars, and they're drinking fizzy drinks rather than hot water or tea, and so this is all adding to the intake of HF, SSS foods, the high fat, sugar, starch and salt intake. So what we think is because people are eating out more, because people are cooking less, because people are shopping more at supermarkets and buying ready meals and prepared meals and frozen foods and chilled foods, people have almost sort of lost control. They've ceded control of their diet, which is also, of course, what's happened in the West. But this is, happening slightly later in China, but like everything in China, it might be happening later, but the pace that it's happening at, the acceleration of change is quite massive.
One of the things you touch on in the book is how single-child families and other cultural factors to do with children are also relevant to this. Can you explain that a little?
Well, many Chinese healthcare specialists and dietitians look at the one-child policy as a problem. The one-child policy, of course, leads to what they call the little emperor sort of syndrome, spoiled brat, and what we would call what marketers call the six-pocket syndrome. So every child, of course, has parents and then two sets of grandparents, and well, until recently they would have had aunts and uncles as well. We've now got the first generation that don't have aunts and uncles. But what it meant was that there was a lot of spending per child, and there was also not much control over that spending. This was understandable. It's very much the same sort of reason that I have terrible teeth, which is, my parents grew up in the Second World War. Well, I'm English, and my parents grew up in the Second World War, and then until the 1950s, sugar and sweets were rationed. And so when I came along in the 1960s, they never wanted to say no, because it was something they hadn't been able to have. And of course, here are parents, certainly grandparents, who may have actually lived through famine, who may have been through starvation. And of course, they don't want to deny their children and that very special one child anything. So in that sense, two things are happening. One is, it's an achievement for China overall. It's literally famine to gluttony in two generations. And one, it's what we would call a wealth deficit. So, there are the wealth benefits of people having more money, more disposable income, more freedom of availability. Supply of food, access to food is not a problem, right? The question now is, now that everyone in the cities anyway pretty much has enough to eat, are they going to look at the quality of what they're eating? And the wealth deficit of all of this is that people will get obese, and from the obesity they will get sick.
Have you got some numbers? I mean, how much fatter are people getting? How much more sugar are they eating, or fat? Or how do we quantify this?
Yeah, the first sort of, it's a straightforward measurement of waistline, what they call the body mass index, right? Which is accepted by all medical professionals. The first surveys really were in the early 1980s. And those were surveys that were trying to quantify how many people didn't have enough to eat, how much malnutrition there was in China. A side effect of that was that they suddenly found that, there was a problem with obesity at the other end of the scale. 1982, about 7% of urban China was already overweight. They didn't really classify obesity and clinical obesity and morbid obesity then. 1992, when the next surveys were done, it was 15%. It had doubled, basically, with about another 30 million Chinese being obese. And again, 2002, it had doubled again. Now, we think we're at somewhere around 120 million Chinese who are obese.
120 million.
120 million who are obese. Now, crucially for that, one of the things that's not talked about at the moment is that within urban China, almost 10% of the population is diabetic. And about 15% of the population is what we call pre-diabetic. And that's in a society where we believe that is underdiagnosed. But it's not talked about. I mean, only last year, a journalist in China got into awful trouble for reporting that Hu Jintao is diabetic. This was a state secret. Right? So it's not really talked about very often. But and I found these numbers to be quite surprising, even though they're numbers that have been checked by the New England Journal of Medicine from research that's been done here in China. But when you start to talk to people, when you start to talk to Chinese friends and Chinese people, everyone says, "Oh yeah, my brother-in-law's got diabetes," or my sister's got diabetes, or people start talking about it. But it's much more prevalent than we think. And of course, diabetes is a problematic disease for a healthcare system that's already in crisis, because you don't get diabetes on a Monday and die on a Wednesday, which the healthcare system can handle. You get diabetes increasingly when you're young in China, and you can live your full term, your full span, but you will need pharmaceuticals of one kind or another every single day of your life.
So this means
you don't cure diabetes, you only manage it.
This means a windfall for pharma companies, does it?
Well, it can go one of two ways. One is that the healthcare system at the moment, which and you've talked about before, is basically a pay-on-the-door system. Now, if mum falls over and breaks her hip, you take her to the hospital, you go and get your savings out of the bank and you pay for a new hip. It's a set amount of money and it's gone. If your 12-year-old gets MODY, which is multiple onset of diabetes in the young, which is a problem in China, they may still live to 80 years old. They'll just need some sort of pharmaceutical all the time. At the moment, that would probably be, insulin, but that's an old school technology now. There are very expensive pharmaceuticals around that target the kind of type 2 diabetes that affects your eyesight or affects swelling in your legs or something like that. They're targeted. Those are much more expensive. And Chinese middle class people, who are mainly the ones suffering from this, are, like all the rest of us in the world, medicating off of searching on the internet and then going and demanding that drug from their doctor. Now, whether or not your health coverage will cover that for the next 50 years is very unlikely. Your savings are going to get depleted very, very quickly. So you could, as we see the emergence of this explosion of diabetes here, we could see some very angry middle-class Chinese people who feel that their little treasures are not being looked after adequately by the healthcare service. This is a change of emphasis of everything that the healthcare service here has ever had to deal with. It's the arrival of lifestyle diseases. It's what kills us in the West. It's what kills Europeans. It's what kills Americans. It's cancers. It's hypertension. It's stroke. It's diabetes. It's these kind of diseases that people have to care about. And that's not, if you go back 5 years and look at the top 10 killers in China, none of those are on the list.
What part has advertising played in all of this?
Well, I'm a little bit cynical about the advertisers. Because now I start to see advertisers representing organisations like Weight Watchers. I mean, Weight Watchers is open already in Shanghai and various other Chinese cities. One could make a joke about the fact that Weight Watchers is a joint venture with Danone, the French food conglomerate that happens to be the largest manufacturer of sugary biscuits in China. So they're getting it at both ends, right? You sell them the fat and then you sell them the way to lose fat. Advertisers, of course, are doing this. Many advertising agencies here are involved in, frankly, spurious claims about slimming pills, which are usually diuretics or something, and can actually be quite dangerous. Of course, they're representing, they're promoting fast food. Partly it's because it's a very lax environment here compared to, say, the European Union in terms of advertising, sugary foods or high-fat foods to children, or claims you can make for products. So I'm worried about that. But the main thing I'm worried about is that, there is this general perception that in advertising, when you want to show prosperous, healthy children, you show rather plump children. But then all of a sudden, when you want to show teenage or older models, particularly women, all of a sudden we see nothing but size 0, heroin chic models. Now, trying to take an overweight, obese 12-year-old girl and push her through the pipe to come out the other end as a 16-year-old, super skinny supermodel, is not something that can be done very easily naturally. So what that's doing to people's perception of their body image and what it's doing to people's frustrations here about themselves, and can be leading to, we've got a lot of stats on obesity, we've got a lot of stats on overweight. What we don't have any official statistics on here, except anecdotal evidence, is incidences of bulimia and anorexia. We don't know about eating disorders at the other end, which is still a little bit of a taboo here.
Paul, this book is a little bit different from your other books because, to my knowledge, you've had your research company for 15 years, but you've tended to keep your writing life separate, and you've written about history in North Korea and in China. Whereas this book is sort of done with Matthew Crabb, your business partner, is kind of a merger of the two. It's a book and it comes out of your research. Can you tell us about that?
Well, we just thought, we've been researching consumer markets and retail markets here for over 15 years now. And over that time, we've built up this massive amount of data. And, one side of our life is we're like that weird guy on that program Numbers, who looks at all these numbers and can find out who the murderer is, And we're a bit like that. We tend to look at these spreadsheets of numbers, of sales, what's being sold where and who's buying and who's selling and what price is rising and all that sort of thing. And it tells us various stories. It tells us that, less people are cooking at home, more people are buying prepared foods. It tells us that more people are eating out. It tells us that, young people are eating at fast food restaurants a rather alarming amount of times here. It tells us lots of stories. And another story it told us was that people were losing control of their diet and losing control of their weight. And we thought, in terms of people outside China, a lot of people, when we talk about this outside China, particularly in America and places where obesity is a massive issue, to the point that, governments have intervened about things. We see Michelle Obama and the Surgeon General in America involving themselves in obesity campaigns and so on. We wanted people, it was almost a counterintuitive way to think. But it does show that as China moves more towards a diamond-shaped middle-class economy, with more middle-class people, with more disposable income, yet more choice, and as we also see, more people with more disposable income, more availability of food, more urbanization, as we say, to move to the city is almost to put yourself in the position where you can get fatter. But we still have 10, 15 million people a year moving into cities. So this is expanding. It's not just in China, it's in other emerging markets. India has a similar problem. Many countries in Southeast Asia have a problem. One has to admit that, we have no comparisons in this book putting China against America. America is still off the scale as far as fat people goes and obesity goes. Australia, in per capita terms, has just become the most obese country in the world. But it is a problem. And most importantly, it's a problem that is going to whack the healthcare system here. And what we're worried about is that the healthcare system has been very slow to change. And it's something that worries a lot of Chinese people. And if the healthcare system doesn't change, doesn't adapt itself, and finds itself with a rise in lifestyle diseases that it can't cope with, and, God forbid, gets hit with another kind of SARS or avian flu shock that it can't foresee, that could be enough combined, a sort of perfect storm that could crash the healthcare system completely.
On that note, Paul French, co-author of Fat China, thanks very much for being on Down TV.